start with a primary set, and as we grow older, we acquire more of them.
When your emotions control your action, it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
This will help. Sit down. Emotions are centered in the lower part of the brain.
It is complicated, yes, but mysterious no longer.
Emotional behavior is largely involuntary.
I can't believe that.
We have certain basic emotions which are controlled subconsciously. Notice your own emotional reactions. What did you feel? What did you do?
Under control, your emotions can make you healthier and happier and improve the lives of people around you.
This is pretty clever.
That's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea.
All right. Well, yes, we have begun a series in emotions, getting a grip. Pastor George let us off last week looking at guilt, and this week we'll be looking at a different emotion, and it was on my heart to really bring this forward to the church today because I believe it is an important thing that I think we need to get a hold of before it gets a hold of us. And today I want to talk to you about tiredness. Tiredness is what I want to talk to you about. I think God sometimes has a sense of humor where he wants you to live a sermon before you actually preach it. So I kind of come to you today with that, having gone through some of the things that Pastor George has already mentioned, having a newborn who is a month old, a 3-year-old daughter, and then having an unexpected appendectomy, and your body not healing as quite as fast as you would like to. And then, of course, there's the 2 dogs as well. So it's been a bit of a challenge these last couple weeks. I do thank you for many of your prayers, your thoughts, your meals, your text messages, even your gifts. It's been great. I feel like I'm a younger Mike Machurdo, one of our elders here. If you heard him preach a month and a half ago, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Mike, but I'm learning from you. But it's been good, and but yet tiring. And there's a lot of things we can be tired about, isn't there? There's a lot of things that can cause us to have a little bit of stress and weigh on our emotions. Anybody tired of the road construction that's been going on around here? Anybody tired of that yet? Thought I might get a few amens for that one, right? Happening right outside of our door. Anybody tired of the supply chain issues going on? That one's kind of got me a little bit. It seems like every time I go to Starbucks, they have something I can't get. There's a lot of other things we can be tired of. A lot more serious things. I'm thinking of the wife who's been pushing her husband to be more of the leader in the home and to take more responsibility there, and she's tired. I'm thinking of the husband who's been giving himself self-sacrificially to his family, putting in long hours, and he's tired. I'm thinking of the young person, the teenager, who's been facing struggles in their high school through different relationships going wrong, and they're tired. Thinking of the young adult who's trying to make their way through this world, trying to find their place, studying long hours for that exam, and you're tired. Thinking of the young couple who's been trying to get pregnant, and it just seems like time after time, things fall through, and they're tired. There's a lot of things to be tired about, a lot of things that can cause us to become weighed down. It reminds me actually of a story of a father who was playing cops and robbers with his 3 active sons in the backyard after dinner. And one of the boys shot his dad and yelled, "Bang, you're dead." And the dad, he fell dramatically to the ground. But then he just laid there without moving. And a watching neighbor ran over to see if he had been hurt in the fall. When the neighbor bent over him, the overworked father opened one eye and said, "Shh, don't give me away. This is the only chance I've had to rest all day." I think we're all looking for that kind of rest, that space. And, I find, though, just in our world in general, and obviously in the church today, our minds are cluttered by anxieties and worries of every kind. There's truly a restlessness in our world, in our culture, in our hearts, which, like a cancerous tumor, it seeks to destroy us with its unrestrained hostility. It comes from within the recesses and caverns of our very hearts. and souls. You know, as I look at this world today, I wonder, what is the greatest epidemic of the modern era? And specifically in the modern church. And I would suggest that it is not one but many, which are all tied to this restless spirit of our age. Fear and worry and anxiety and much more all reflect, I believe, a lack of understanding of God's desire for us to enter into his rest. And that's what I want you to hear this morning, is I believe it is God's desire, it is God's will for you to enter in to his rest. It's a rest that's above our circumstances. It's a rest that even in the busyness of life energizes us and gives us a confidence to walk with peace and with strength. It's a rest that is a truly special thing that God offers to his people. But unfortunately, I find that many in the church today fail to reach it. So let's look at what God's word has to say about this morning. If you have your Bibles, go with me to Hebrews chapter 4. That's where we're going to be spending our time here today, is in Hebrews chapter 4. And we're going to look at what the author of Hebrews has to say to us about this very thing of tiredness, but more importantly about rest and how important it is to our lives. As we go to Hebrews chapter 4, we start out in verses 1 and 2, and the author says this. He says, therefore, which that's actually an important word, we'll come back to that in a little bit. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as it did to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listen. So what's the author of Hebrews, what's he talking about here? Well, he gets into a story that took place actually in the Old Testament. It took place in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, and he's warning his audience about something, and that warning is obviously about a rest that still stands, that's still out there. And he wants to make sure his readers understand that they don't fail to actually reach this rest, that it is not something that they are blocked from in their life. And he brings up an example that took place in the Old Testament where the people of God, the Israelites, actually failed to reach and enter into that rest. And he says, for good news came to them just as now it comes to us. But the message they heard, it didn't give them any advantage because of one reason. They weren't united by faith. See, the story we find that takes place in Numbers 13 and 14 is of the Israelites. And they were wandering in the wilderness for many years, and they had finally gotten to the point where they were about to enter into the promised land, the land that God had promised to give to them, where they could have their feet established, have permanence, and ultimately have this thing we're talking about today, which is rest. And they had to do one thing, though. They had to send some spies out into the land. They sent out 12 to be exact, to go check out the land and see what it was all about and give the report back to the people of Israel and back to Moses. And so that's what the spies did. And they came back, and 10 of the 12 spies come back with a bad report. And they tell the land of Israel, or they tell the Israelites, they say to them, listen, you know, the land, it's flowing with milk and honey. There's a lot of good stuff in there. It looks like a land that is very promising, but there's only a few bad things, only a few problems with what we have to face. And they start explaining to Israel and to Moses that there are people there that are like giants. As a matter of fact, we were like grasshoppers to them. That's what we felt like to them. And there's also these large walls of Jericho that are blocking us from being able to enter the land. And this bad report spread throughout Israel. And fear with that began to spread throughout Israel. And you had Joshua and Caleb who tried to convince the people, no, we can take this land. God is with us. His word has told us we need to go and do this. But unfortunately, the fear had spread so much that the people of Israel would not and will not enter the land. And they complained, they whined, they murmured, and finally God had decided that that generation would not see his rest. That's why we see in verse number 3 where it says, "For we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." You see, what I would submit to you is that it wasn't the bad report that was the problem. It wasn't the walls of Jericho that were the problem. It wasn't those walls that were blocking them from actually entering that rest. It wasn't the giants they were facing that was blocking them from taking the land and having rest. But rather, I would argue that what was truly blocking them from entering into the promised land is the first thing we see in our roadblock to rest. It was unbelief. As a matter of fact, when you look at the word therefore in verse 1, it brings you back to verse 19 of chapter 3, where the author says, "So you see, therefore, they were unable to enter because of unbelief." You see, and for you and I today, I think this is important for us to understand. I think for some of us, we think if I can just get beyond these circumstances, if I can just get to this point, if I could just get to that vacation, if this thing was out of my life, then things would be okay. But what I think we really need to understand, and what we see from what the author of Hebrews says here today, is it is not those walls in your life that are keeping you from having rest, from having peace. But it's this thing called unbelief. And for Israel, it was what was keeping them from entering the promised land. You see, it was the fact that they didn't believe that God was going to be with them as they went on that journey. It was the fact that they didn't believe God was good enough, strong enough, and faithful enough to complete what he had started. And because of that, right there alone, blocked them from entering the promised land. But and for you and I today, this is no different. I mean, it's the same reason why you can get on an airplane, and I know some of you, most of you, I will say this, can get on an airplane and fly 30,000 feet above the air, right, and take a nap. And some of you even do it first class. I know who you are, right? But we can do that because when we get on that airplane, we're putting trust in the fact that the mechanics did their job, right? And those who did the checkups, that they did it adequately. And not only that, but you're trusting the pilots that they had adequate training, even though you've never met them, you don't know them, that they're going to be able to fly this plane through whatever comes, whether it's storm or turbulence or whatever that might be. Most of you, I'm going to say, you will sleep right through it all. Not because you know everything and have seen everything and made sure everything is working properly, but because you have trust and faith in the process and in the pilots and what has all been done. Now, some of you will still white knuckle it all the way through, and I get that. That's why I say most of you. But how much more can we trust God to be our pilot through this life? I mean, we trust, fallible man, imperfect man, to fly us 30,000 feet in this small capsule across big bodies of water or a couple hours south of Florida, but yet we have a hard time trusting God, a perfect, infallible being, to fly us through this life. And you see, that's why I argue with you today. The first roadblock to us entering into his rest is unbelief. It's unbelief. And when you and I face any circumstances, any problems in life, temptation, or even our sin, I think it comes down to this. Because ultimately what you have to decide in that moment is, am I going to trust what I can see with my own reconnaissance, my own understanding? Am I going to go by what I can touch and feel and what I've experienced? Or am I going to trust in the promises of God? Am I going to put more weight there and rest? I think the question that we have to ask now is, how does this faith work itself out? I mean, how does this practically, look in our life today? And I think the answer is found in the word rest. The word rest is used 8 times in this chapter here in Hebrews chapter 4. And the word is actually used, it's actually an English word that we get from the Greek that is the word pause. And that's what this word literally means. It means to pause or to cease from working. To literally stop working or to cease in action. And for the Israelites, God's desire from them was to cease from their wanderings and the worry and the burden that was bringing on them. And I believe it's the same thing here today. It can also mean to lean on somebody for support. You see, what I believe the author of Hebrews is trying to call us into today is this practice of rest. And this is how I think it practically works. It works itself out in faith, is to just pause, to stop, and to take what the Hebrew writer calls a Sabbath rest. To stop working and to focus. This isn't just, family activities. This isn't just go and take a nap. This is actually has the idea of worship as well with it. And the Hebrew writer wants us to just pause, stop, focus on God, and remember. And you say, remember what? How about that you're not God? That the universe is going to be just fine and continue to go on without you? How about remembering that maybe you don't have the kind of control that maybe we think we do, and to just cease from doing all of those things that have occupied our mind and just to focus on Him and remember that we aren't God, He is, and everything is going to be okay. As a matter of fact, I found that there are so many things outside of our control in this life. I mean, take, for instance, our bodies. They're incredibly complex, right? Most of which you don't even know about, much less control, breathing, heartbeat, digestion. And you don't decide what chemicals to dump into your stomach to dissolve the turkey and dressing at Thanksgiving, right? It's not like we go, okay, now it's time to secrete some bile and generate those enzymes, right? It's foolish. Or how about even this? There's 15,000 medical diagnosed codes, CPT codes, each one representing a different disease or medical condition, which there are new ones being added almost always. Everything from measles 072 to an accident involving a spacecraft, E845. And that doesn't even include things that can go wrong, which we don't even have a number for. And can you absolutely prevent accidents? I mean, even if you're careful and as skilled as a driver as Pastor George is, you can't control what the other guy is going to do. You can diet, you can exercise, but you can't choose the genes you inherit from your parents. Even if they've passed on a genetic weakness of some kind, you're basically stuck with it. You can work to improve your health, of course. There are some things within our control, but you can't guarantee health and safety. Not your own or anyone else's. The needs exceed your ability to supply. There is no area in life which you are able to guarantee your needs. I mean, think about food, for instance. Unless you grow your own vegetables and raise your own livestock, and even then, if only you can control the weather and prevent every animal disease, you are not self-sufficient. You depend on farmers, truck drivers, and grocers, and they depend on seed companies and oil companies, and we found that out with Y2K, how that reminded us how interdependent our economy really is. Even though Y2K didn't disrupt the economy, a war or a series of natural disasters could do so, as we kind of found out in 2020. Not only that, but your ability to pay for food and clothing and housing and transportation and medical care and everything else is dependent on your remaining healthy and able to work. And then you take the hardest one, relationships. Relationships with your wife, with your husband, your children, your friendships. None of these are completely under your control. For one thing, they all involve other people and other people's emotions and they're not underneath your control. You can't make them do or feel what you want. You see, and yet we try to live life like these things are under our control. We go 7 days a week, 24/7, as if these things we can control in some way. We never take time to just stop, pause, and focus, and worship God, and remember that we are not, and He is. And that He is the sovereign ruler of the universe. And if we would just find time with Him, some of these things may change in our mind. But the problem is you and I believe, have been conditioned by a stoic, can-do, fast-paced, adrenaline-addicted, workaholic, bigger is better, and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, self-made society to believe the lie that everything that occurs in our life is the product of our own good intentions and hard work. And while I am a big fan of hard work and a good work ethic, we have gone completely the other way. And it has caused us to become worn down, tired, stressed out. I love how one writer put this when talking about the Sabbath rest. He said, "Sabbath is taking a day to remind myself that I did not make the world and that it will continue to exist without my efforts. Sabbath is a day when my work is done, even if it isn't. Sabbath is a day when my job is to enjoy. Period. Sabbath is a day when I am fully available to myself and to those I love most. Sabbath is a day when I remember that when God made the world, He saw that it was good. Sabbath is a day when I produce nothing. Sabbath is a day when I remind myself that I am not a machine." You know, I've seen this work itself out in my 3-year-old daughter. We're the kind of parents that, we're going to make sure our daughter gets a nap in her busy day. Now, I know some parents, they let, their child decide and all that. And I'm not against that either. But for us, I think I'm dad. I think I know a little bit more than she does. And I think I know that she may need a nap in her day, especially, when the morning is busy and we got things going on. It's important, I believe, for her to get a nap, especially if she's going to make it to the end of the day. But there are those times, there are those moments when she just wants to protest it, right? And she's not for it. She's not going to have that nap. And she all of a sudden goes from this sweet little girl to this little cranky person. Like, I don't quite get it, right? And it's like you can do nothing to satisfy her. Nothing works. Right? She's crying because she doesn't have her Elsa doll, right? So then you got to go give her Elsa doll. And it's not the Elsa doll she wants. It's her Anna doll that she wants. And then it's not the Anna doll. She throws that across the room and she wants Olaf. If you don't know who these people are, just watch Frozen. You'll get quite acquainted with them real fast, right? It just seems like though nothing satisfies her. And then before you know it, she's hurting relationships with her mom and dad, and she's saying things she would never say before. And by the end of the day, you find her breaking down in the kitchen, laying on the cold, hard floor, just crying for no reason, right? And all of this just could have been easily prevented if she just would have taken that nap, like Dad knows better. But you know what I find funny is that these are the same kind of symptoms we exhibit when we don't get time to rest with our Creator. See, many of us have found ourselves breaking down, harming relationships, frustrated, all because we just haven't taken the time to stop and pause and focus and worship God and remember that we are not and He is. My question for you this morning is, when is the last time you've just stopped and sat and just spent quality time in His presence? Put away the distractions, all those things you need to do, all those things swirling in your mind, and just spent time with your Creator. And maybe then you might actually find the rest you're looking for. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Not just physical, but the rest for your souls that we all need, that we're all longing for. I think it's important, church, that we begin to make this an important, regular part of our life. I mean, is it any wonder that so many believers fail to enter into the rest of God's sovereign provision when we live in a church culture which has elevated the status of man and devalued the status of the sovereign ruler of the universe? Is it really any shocking news that the general consensus with regard to stress and fear, anxiety is only marginally different in the church than in the mainstream culture? Our lives reflect more of the American mainstream culture than they do the radical love and grace found in the abundance of the cross of our Redeemer. Why do you think Chick-fil-A is so successful? You think it's because they serve great food? That helps, right? They do have awesome food. One of the most successful franchises there are in this country, and yet they're closed one day a week. Some of you are probably thinking they could be the most successful if they were open that one day a week. I know you business people out there, I get it. Why do you think they are? I think we need to learn this thing in the church today about making it a regular habit to stop and pause and to spend time with our God. You know, there's one other thing that I believe will stop us from entering the rest that God has for us. We see it here in Hebrews chapter 4 in verses 6 and 7. It's another roadblock. The Hebrew author says, "Since therefore it remains for some to enter, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience." And he goes on to say in verse 7, again, he appoints a certain day today, saying through David so long afterward, in the words already quoted, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." So the second thing that blocks us, I believe, from entering into God's rest is this thing called disobedience. And oftentimes unbelief will begin to manifest itself in disobedience. You know, I know there are many things we try to find to give us peace of mind in this life. We try to do it through counseling. We try to do it through a pill. We try to do it through a bottle. We try to do it through vacation. And while some of these things are not bad in themselves and necessary at times, none of them can replace obedience to God. And I love how the Hebrew writer, he says here, not only that, but there's another word that sticks out to me, and it's the word today. You see, oftentimes the deceitfulness of sin has a way of beginning to harden our hearts and a way of making us think that, you know what, I'll get to that when I get to that. It'll be fine. When I'll tackle that issue in my life when I want to and when I'm ready. But what happens here is we find that the deceitfulness of sin begins to harden our heart and makes it even harder for us to find the rest that God has for us. That's why he is so urgent when he says, if you hear God's voice here today and there's a part of your life that is just unwillingly, stubbornly refusing to follow God's word in one part of your life, he says, don't let that pass, because it'll only make you hardened and keep you from the rest that you desire. One person put it this way: delayed obedience is disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. I love what another writer said. He said, the cost of obedience is nothing compared with the cost of disobedience. What obedience will cost you is nothing compared to what happens in your life when you begin to continue to go down a path of disobedience. And what I think some of you need to hear today is if you're going to continue to do things your way, go on your own reconnaissance, go on your own understanding, I think what you need to hear today is you will not find the rest you're looking for. It just won't happen, especially if you're a child of God, a Christian following Christ. For some of us, disobedience needs to begin to be looked at and find that the pathway to rest is obedience. Well, we've gotten two I would say, things that the doctor would say don't do. And then we have the third thing here that the doctor would give you a prescription for, and that is found in verse 11. The writer says, "Let us, therefore, strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience." Strive to enter that rest. It almost seems like an oxymoron, but it's more of a paradox. You see, God's not calling us to be lazy. He's not calling us to just take a nap. He wants us to strive so that we find this rest. So we could say that it is our job to rest. It is our work to rest. If God was to give you a report card of how you're doing that today, what would it be? What would it be? It is your job to rest. It's no different than working hard before a vacation, tying up all the loose ends because you know what's coming. Or if you're a student planning for those final exams that are coming just before the break, putting in all that effort and time because you know a rest is coming. The only labor reserved for us, I believe, is the labor to enter into his rest. You know, so many of us, I believe, don't really grasp what the author is saying here. I love what the psalmist says. He says that unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor in vain. And you know, so many of us tried to build in our own strength our families. We try to build in our own strength our job and our career. We try to build in our own strength our education, our relationships, our hobbies, and then we push God to the fringes of those things and to the fringes of our life, and it's no wonder why so many of us are exhausted. Because we have to hold on to those things in our own strength, and we have to continue to control those things in our own strength, while at the same time pushing God to the fringes of those things. Yet, the author of Hebrews, I believe here, is telling us it's time for you to work to rest and to make that a part of your life, to begin to hand over control more to God and to let him build those things and to give him more area and access into your life. And the way we do that is by taking a Sabbath rest, a regular time where we stop, we pause, we focus, and we remember that we are not and he is. We are not and he is. What this says basically is, as I begin my week, the question changes from what do I want to accomplish to opening our hand and saying, God, what do you want to accomplish this week?